The tale opens inside a demon's castle, where our hero thinks that no matter what time it is, good always wins against evil. The knight wonders if he is the demon king, and when he confirms it, he accepts his heavy destiny as the great ruler of all demons. Odia Nord, the 100th demon king, stood before them. Aruzia starts to wonder when it all began. Long ago, people thought demons were evil, so many of their family members were killed in the name of justice, and the demons fought back in anger. And soon, both sides raised their swords at each other, making any chance to talk go away and turning the fight into a pointless mess. He knows the winner of this pointless war will soon rule the world, but he also knows people have always been scared of power that is too great. He remembers a future where the mightiest heroes finally put an end to the Demon King. Still, he insists there is no worry left because both sides have their weapons ready and no way back to peace. Even though the Demon King holds all the power, the heroes only get strong by facing challenges given to them by gods and spirits. When both sides play their strongest tricks, the fight gets fierce, but justice wins in the end, proving a belief that has been passed down from one generation to the next. Because of this, the heroes finally triumph over Luslia. As the sword sinks into his chest, he realizes the heroes were ready for him all along. Among them stood a sword master, a saint, and an archmage, yet the world still saw the heroes as good and the Demon King as evil, so he began to think that losing might just be the right choice and let out a small, resigned smile. The knight notices the quiet laughter and wonders if he is hiding something, then meets his gaze and thinks back on a promise he made. A friend's daughter was getting ready to celebrate her birthday the next day. He remembers telling the little girl, Iris, that he would come visit and how she had cheered with pure happiness at the news. He tells the knight that Diankind is ending, and tears fall as he realizes that without the Demon King, Iris will be hunted down and lost. After a quiet pause to think, the knight finally admits he's speaking the truth and reveals that all either side has done so far is just kill each other. Even if the church teaches that demons are evil servants, deep down humans and demons are actually the same. He says that if the knight can't trust what he says, she needs to see it with her own eyes. As she slowly starts to doubt the church's orders to kill demons, he fades away and whispers one last hope that if she ever feels anything for humanity, she will finally understand. He corrected himself, hoping that demons and humans could share a future together. The knight watches him vanish and reaches out, knowing she gets it. She rests her hand on his shoulder, nods at his words, and vows never to treat demons unfairly. He quietly says thank you and finally sees that the knight is a woman. This is his goodbye, a path that leads straight into hell. Just before he dies, he sees the saints looking at him with anger, and though he wonders why she hates him so, he decides it doesn't matter now that he is about to disappear. He finds hope in the thought that saving the knight means a bright future, and though the hero defeats the Demon King to make the story seem like a happy ending, the truth is very different. A voice started shouting his name, Luru, again and again. He slowly opens his eyes. She smiled gently at him as he woke up and greeted him, and he realized she was just a human woman. As she stepped closer, he started to worry about her plan until she gently lifted him up, praised him as a good boy, and noticed his tiny hand, so she said he must be hungry and that his mom would soon make a meal. In that instant, he knew the woman holding him was his mother, and a warm, comforting feeling washed over him. Even as his mind began to fade, he remembered the old demon tale that life and death are just a cycle to turn into something new, a path he never thought he'd walk until now. He could still remember the days he spent with his friends and the exact moment the heroes beat him. This made him question why he had been reborn with the memories of a former demon lord and what it all meant. No matter how hard he thought about it in his present shape, all he could do was eat and sleep, and he missed the busy days of official duties and endless battles. But now, as a baby, he had nothing to do but play all day long. Watching the maid, he knew he had to find out what was happening fast. He wanted to ask her how many years had passed since the demon lord was defeated, but quickly realized he couldn't even speak and wished desperately to regain control of his body. The maid suddenly remembered her duty, grabbed her wand and got ready to boil some water. She started chanting to bring forth a tiny flame from the red burn. As he watched her, he started to wonder if she was actually casting a spell, especially since the strange words she spoke sounded nothing like normal grammar. He figured a spell this simple shouldn't need any luck or special tools to work. Then it clicked for him that since he was reborn as a baby, he hadn't even cast a spell once, and he started to wonder just how much magic power he actually had inside him now. He squeezed his small hand tight, knowing humans weren't as magical as demons and expecting to lose. But to his surprise, he felt a huge powerful rush of magic inside him. This made him wonder if not only his memories but also his magic had come with him. The feeling was just like when he felt the Demon Lord, yet he couldn't push his magic through his body as easily as before, wondering if it was because he was human or just too weak, but he knew that with some special training he could fix it. Soon he realized he was all alone, and that silence gave him a chance to see just how powerful he truly was. He knew that without it, he would be destroyed again, just like in his previous life. 7 years passed before he stepped into the library and used his power without fear. He floated books around him without climbing a chair, then snapped his fingers to send them back to their shelves. Although he felt a bit nervous about drawing attention, he was glad to discover he could now cast spells quite well, even big ones that could wipe out a whole village, but he had no plans to try that out. As he walked through the room, he realized that besides magic, he'd learned a few other things, and since the day he lost, he'd discovered that thousands of years had passed, making everything feel strange and new. Suddenly, a voice called out to him because his mother had found him and knew exactly where he was. She spotted the book he was reading and asked if he was diving into those myths about ancient demons again. He confirmed he was part of the group and explained that he found them fascinating. The old demons, who used to fight humans, were now just stories people doubted they were real. His mother softly patted his head and wondered if he truly loved reading, or if he was just caught up in the magic of being a kid. He smiled softly, knowing people had stopped believing in the old demons, but he still held on to the hope that a few might have survived, because these creatures lived far longer than humans, and he was sure he could find them if even just one was left. For now, at just 7 years old, he was stuck in the village and could only read. His mom remembered something and said his dad, Patrick, would be back home pretty soon. Patrick wrote that he'd be back in 2 weeks and he promised to bring a whole new batch of books with him. Patrick, the swordmaster for the kingdom of Leonard's Knights and the ruler of Caddy's village, was a man Luru desperately wanted to see once more, hoping to pick up his sword training again, only to have his mother stop him once more as she remembered something else she needed to share. She asked if he was going to meet Rusty and the others that day, and he admitted he'd lost track of time before confirming he would. His mother pushed him to hurry up or he'd be late, so he agreed and rushed to the meeting spot where he showed up just a minute late, to see Rusty waving and 2 girls pointing out that he was behind schedule. Rusty called out that Luru had finally shown up, wondering if they really hadn't planned to meet right there. Luru apologized for his delay by saying he had been getting lost in a good book, but Rusty couldn't believe that reading could be more fun than adventure and proudly declared his own dream of becoming an adventurer someday. Luru just stared at him without saying a word. Timmed in, joking that Rusty loved talking about adventure even though he still hadn't passed Patrick's sword test. She smirked and asked when we could leave the village, and the irritated Rusty told me she was being too mean. Yuri stepped forward to tell me that while dreaming is vital, her words had gone too far, especially since those 3 children had been Luru's closest friends since he was reborn. He knew me and Yuri both liked Rusty and didn't want him to leave, but he wasn't sure if Rusty knew their hearts were there. Luru steered the conversation to ask Rusty if he'd kept his promise, reminding him that something exciting was supposed to happen. Rusty's eyes sparkled with joy as he realized Luru was right. Today was the long-awaited day they had been hoping for. He spoke with excitement, shouting that the true adventurers were on their way. Yuri noted that adventurers sometimes walked through the village but wondered if they were really just bodyguards for merchants. Rusty shook his head with a grin, insisting this time was different, because the world was about to be visited by a legendary hero who had already carved a path through uncharted lands. He pushed everyone toward the village gate to welcome the new arrival, knowing that once Rusty set his mind on something, nothing could stop him. A short while later, the group arrived at the village gate and found a crowd already gathering. But they felt let down when they couldn't find any adventurer there. Luru told Rusty the guest wasn't there yet, and Rusty slumped in his chair. But in the next moment, Rusty brightened again and wondered out loud if the adventurer was coming soon. He sprinted forward, shouting he'd go check, while the girls chased Rusty as Luru smiled to himself, knowing that adventurers were needed now that the once-managed lands had gone wild again. He couldn't help wondering if that was just time passing. Then, a terrified scream suddenly tore through the air. A huge monster was charging straight at the village, and right at Rusty, who was running the front. Luru quickly let go of his power the moment he saw that the creature from the forest was a monster. But before he could do anything else, he felt another strong force pushing against him. Suddenly, an elf stepped forward and spun a fierce whirlwind of wind to stop the monster in its tracks. Right then, someone jumped right onto the monster's back. With no trouble at all, the man swung his sword and took the beast's head off in one quick move. Luru stood frozen, unable to believe his eyes after seeing what just happened. When the monster disappeared, the adventurer checked on the frightened boy lying on the ground and asked if he was hurt, while Rusty jumped up and cheered with excitement from what he had just witnessed. He nudged Rusty to say thanks, and the adventurer stuttered just a bit before finally saying it. A woman greeted them with a big smile and said she was so happy everyone made it back safely. Luru saw her, but before he could say a word, Rusty jumped in, guessing she was a spirit because of her magic and those pointed ears. The woman told him he was close but not quite right, then revealed she was an elf made by the spirits and introduced herself as Yumis. Then the adventurer introduced himself as Gran, saying he and Yumis traveled together as partners. Luru felt a strange, powerful magic coming from both of them that he had never seen in his village, which made him realize that Yumis and Gran were truly capable. Yumis told us that lots of village kids dreamed of being adventurers, then she asked Rusty if they all shared that same dream. Rusty stumbled over his words to say he wanted to be an adventurer too, making the others laugh, so Gran gave him a friendly pat on the head and warned that while it wasn't impossible, he would need to train hard because without real skills, that path could be deadly. Rusty shouted his answer with wild excitement, making Gran laugh and cheer that he was on the right track. Gran said he'd tell them adventure stories, but first asked Rusty to lead him to the village, and Rusty happily agreed. Watching the scene, Mi turned to Yuri and said she didn't want Gran making Rusty too angry, while Yuri laughed and wondered if boys ever really change, no matter how old they get. Yumi's, hearing the girls talk, leaned into Luru and asked if things were messy between them, and he admitted it was just a regular love triangle. Yumi's playfully teased him about turning his situation into a love square, but he just laughed and said he was sticking to being a quiet observer. She whispered that he looked strange and asked if she was right to think the two girls were really cute, suggesting he should probably step up and claim his spot now. He thought her advice was way too harsh for a kid and said he'd rather just watch. Yumi's frowned at his reply and quickly pulled back her teasing, calling his taste terrible. He told her her words were sharp but offered to walk her to the inn since she looked tired, and she happily accepted his kind suggestion. As they walked, she spoke with a tired sigh, saying they had been attacked by a monster on their way to the village. That evening at the inn, the grown-ups were handed drinks while the kids sat close by, sipping juice right next to their parents. Gran started telling how they usually stopped at the nearby ruins, but said that this time Yumi's had really started caring about them. Yumi slammed her beer down and retorted that Gran was actually worse since he once said he'd join a fighting tournament, leaving Gran staring at her in shock after she just claimed she was too tired. Yumi's mom said it was wonderful to see how kind the adventurers were, and he replied that Rusty and the others had already grown completely attached to them. A man from the village asked Yumi's if they had come all this way just to see the old ruins on the edge of the settlement. Yumi's said no one knew when or why the old structure was built, but she thought it was probably made by ancient demons, even if it looked unimportant. That news left Luru completely stunned. Gran shook her head, saying it was too hard to prove even if they found the ruins, but Yumi's just sighed, wishing there was at least a romantic story to tell about the ancient demons. Lu thought Gran might be right. He could spot ruins that belonged to ancient demons instantly, but since he couldn't prove it, people still thought those places were just myths. He asked Gran if they always hunted for ruins, but Gran shook his head and said most of their days were spent fighting monsters instead. He said that wandering through ruins and joining tournaments were just his hobbies, and they came to the village because Yumi wanted to see the place, even if he admitted he loved competing whenever he could. Uluru started to think their travels weren't just about doing what others asked, but were actually sparked by their own curiosity. They looked like the perfect adventurers, free to chase whatever they loved without any rules holding them back. As he watched them, he smiled, thinking their adventures looked like real fun. Rusty suddenly shouted that he really wanted to be an adventurer, admitting he needed help before, but promising to work harder to get his sword skills up. He then pleaded with Gran to take him on as her apprentice. But Gran said no, and Rusty, caught off guard, started crying and asked what she meant, only for her to panic and explain that it wasn't that simple. He explained that becoming an adventurer wasn't just about cool heroic moments, but also meant dealing with boring chores first, and most of all, he needed to earn his status as an adventurer before he had the money to take care of Rusty. Gran if she would take him on as an apprentice once he was ready. Gran laughed and told Rusty that if he really wanted it, she'd have no choice but to let him become her master when the time came. He told Rusty that he wouldn't be able to teach him much. Even so, Rusty was absolutely thrilled and thanked Gran with a huge smile. Uluru watched quietly and saw that Rusty had a real knack for making deals happen. His mother whispered that even though Rusty looked happy, she wasn't sure if chasing adventures was really the right road for him. Uluru told her not to worry, explaining that Rusty's dad always said he had a special talent. He whispered to Yuri that Rusty was now certain to become an apprentice, a promise that only fueled Rusty's drive even more. Yuri told him it was a great chance for him, but confessed she felt a little sad about it. Out of nowhere, Yumi's popped up right behind them, making the two girls jump. They screamed in shock, and she quickly apologized for scaring them, explaining that she just wanted to join their chat. She asked if they were having trouble with their love life. Yuri said no right away, but Mi added that since Rusty gets clumsy they were just worried about him. Yumi nodded to show she got it, even though nobody had said anyone's name.
He thought Rusty would surely make his dream come true one day.
When that happened, she wondered if they could really just stay in the village and watch him leave. Before the girls could answer, a loud clap echoed through the air as someone announced that it was time to head home. Even though the children argued, they had no choice but to listen. Tom turned to him and told him it was time to go back home. He nodded with a smile for Gran and Yumi, marveling at how fascinating they were and wishing he could hear even more of their tales. As they walked home, his mother asked when the village had last felt this alive. Luru felt a familiar sadness wash over him whenever the happy crowd scattered, and no matter how many years went by, that lonely feeling stayed exactly the same. His mother called out to him about asking if he would ever leave the village, but she stopped herself right before saying it. She just gave his hand a gentle squeeze and whispered that it was nothing. He gave a simple nod to show he was listening. Even though he knew his mom already understood that one day he'd leave the village just like she had, he still felt the weight of that future. The next day, he practiced by himself deep in the woods with a wooden sword. He kept swinging with all his focus and perfect form. After a while, he wiped the sweat from his face and called it a day, knowing he couldn't let anyone see the dark power inside him that his father, the great knight Patrick, could never understand. On his way home, he thought about getting just a little better before his next practice, then suddenly someone started yelling from far away. Looking ahead, he spotted villagers frantically searching around with worried faces, and he couldn't help but wonder what had gone wrong. Suddenly a woman shouted at him to ask where he'd been and worried he was alone, so he told her he was by himself and asked what was happening. She spoke in a worried voice to say that Rusty and the others were gone. He shouted up, asking the woman if she really said that Rusty and the others had gone missing. She didn't give a straight answer but instead asked if he had seen them himself, saying she hadn't found them since that morning. She told him that the kids hadn't wanted to go home the day before, so she was pretty sure they'd slipped out of the village without anyone noticing. He thought it over, remembered Anuna's talking about a ruin near the village the day before, and guessed it must be off in the opposite direction since he'd never been there himself. He promised the woman he would look for them too, and after she thanked him and warned him to stay out of trouble, he nodded and moved on. He promised to try his hardest, but deep down he knew those 3 kids came first because they were the very first friends he'd ever made since becoming human. When he finally got to the edge of the village, he was shocked to find Yumi's waiting there. She screamed for him to step back, saying she was about to build a wall around the village. She called upon the gentle forest spirits to trade their power for her own and started building a magical wall to keep the village safe from the woods. He screamed at her in panic, saying Rusty and the others were gone, which froze Yumi and made her ask what he just said. He told us the kids were probably at the ruin, and if he couldn't handle it by himself, he'd ask the grown-ups for help. But while Yumi, filled with regret, told him she couldn't stop the casting. A moment later, the mystical wall suddenly appeared at the village's edge, and he shouted at her, demanding to know why she'd done it, while Yumi begged for understanding, saying she only wanted to keep the people inside safe. Then they heard the loud crack of gunfire hitting the wall. He spun around to face the noise and spotted a magical machine shooting at them. Yumi's told us that these machines had risen from the ruins and were flying toward the village, so she had to move fast. He saw the danger at once, for those machines had magical cannons for legs and were demon-built weapons meant to wipe out humans. He was thankful that Yumi's barrier had kept the village safe, yet he couldn't shake the worry that the machines might march on to the towns and cities nearby. He asked Yumi if the situation seemed strange to her, but she replied that even with the ruin there, nothing felt particularly odd. Just as they were getting ready to go back, the wall suddenly gave way because Gran was still inside fighting a giant magic machine. He realized the ruin was a trap, meaning someone had to be controlling the machines with some kind of device. He told Yumi she needed to go somewhere right away, which left her confused. She apologized and explained that no matter what, she couldn't take the barrier down. In the end, he was still just a kid. He touched the barrier, but Yumi told him only the caster could let anyone pass, so she begged him to leave, yet he used his power to smash right. His hand went right through the wall, leaving Yumi in shock since she never let him in. He apologized and said he'd rewritten the magic spell so the barrier now listened to him too. She demanded to know what he meant by changing the magic spell and shouted that it could never be done. He just walked right through, leaving her stuck behind after he whispered that he'd boosted the barrier's power with her own magic to lock her in, making her the guardian for Rusty and the others if they ever came back. As he turned to go, he promised her he was counting on her to help him find the missing kids. He sprinted away, leaving Yumi shouting behind him as he ran. Left all by herself, she stood frozen, stunned and confused about what just happened, and whether that boy was really a child. Meanwhile, inside the ruined building, Gran stood in front of the kids, and he had spotted that even though the enemy machines were moving, they hadn't attacked yet. He yelled at the scared kids that the Mahina would only chase things that moved, telling them to freeze until he gave the word. But he realized that with things like this, there wasn't much he could do about it. A familiar voice called out from behind, and Gran spun around in shock to find him standing there. Gran jumped right in to ask what was going on with Yumi's, and he explained that Yumi's was right now setting up a protective wall around the village. Gran muttered a curse as fear took hold, then shoved the terrified man toward the kids, insisting that since he was already there, he had no choice but to hide with them, only to breathe a sigh of relief when he saw everyone was safe and sound. Then he looked at the Machina Rups Gigantus, a giant titan built to do hard work but sometimes called to fight when things went wrong. He knew that right now, no one else could stop it but him. He also remembered the Flying Machina and the Cannon Abyss, 2 giant war machines that likely looked the same, shared the same mission, and could aim their deadly shots with scary accuracy. He took a step forward, nervous about whether they'd strike from far away, just as Gran yelled for him to stop and stay back. Even so, he kept moving forward, which made Gran beg him to at least listen to her. Rusty shouted to him to stop. He let them know he was okay and promised Gran he'd be there for her. He stepped a little closer to the Titan, and the huge machine twitched as if it knew he was there. As he pulled back, the machina fell quiet again. He explained to Gran that where he stood was the edge of safety, because as long as they stayed away from the ruins, the Titans wouldn't attack. Gran noticed that the Titans were standing guard over the ruin, and asked why, and when he admitted he wondered the same thing about their programming, he guessed the ruin must have been built sometime after he died since he remembered nothing about it. He told Gran he needed to go inside to look into something, but Gran shouted no, refusing to let him risk his life. He admitted it was their mistake and said he had to stay behind. After all, he was just a kid and didn't have enough strength to fight. He looked at Gran and asked if she really meant that it was okay only if he was strong enough to handle it. He looked at Gran to ask if anyone strong enough could step into the ruins, and Gran simply said yes before he charged at the Titans without a second thought, telling Gran to watch him. Gran was so confused and tried to hold him back, but by then he had already run right up to the giant guards. As he stepped past the broken ruins, a giant Titan woke up and lifted its weapon to hit him, but he jumped high into the air. Flying through the air, he grinned at the giant machine and threw such a hard punch that it exploded into pieces. Gran and everyone else, even his old friends, stood there stunned by what they saw. The moment he hit the ground, huge Titans poured in from every side. The huge spear was thrown at him, but he just held out his hand and caught it without any trouble. In one swift move, he grabbed the spear and struck back, easily crushing the last of the giants and bringing them to the ground. Gran stood frozen in shock, staring at him and trying to figure out what was happening. He just asked Gran if his skills were finally good enough. Gran, still shocked by what he saw, admitted he had no argument but insisted on one rule. Either he or Yumi had to go with him because sending just a child into such an important ruin could cause big problems later. Gran told him to go back to the village to take the kids home and warned him not to go deeper into the ruins unless the magic machine was turned off. So instead, he chose to head back to the village or wait for Gran to return, and he agreed to the deal. Before Gran and the others departed, he asked his childhood friends to be careful on the way home, and Rusty nodded in agreement since he knew they simply couldn't keep up with him. He admitted they'd made things messy, and Yuri apologized while urging him to watch out. He waved them off, then turned to face the ruin's dark entrance, wondering if it was safe to step inside. He stepped inside, walked straight to the monitor, and shut down the magic machine. He checked the list and saw no other fighting ships or long-range weapons, proving his guess right that the outside machines were built only to defend. This made him wonder if the ruin was built to keep something safe. While looking at the terminal, he spotted a huge room deep inside the ruin that made him want to rush over right away. But he remembered his promise to Gran and decided to wait. Moments later, he stood quietly in the hallway, trying hard not to think about his past, but the memories kept coming back anyway. He remembered spending time in that same building with his friends, where it used to be full of loud noise and happy laughter. Suddenly, a voice called out to him, pulling him out of his thoughts. Grant came back, said sorry for being late, and asked if I was okay since I looked sad. He smiled softly and said he was okay, saying it was just a bit cold inside the old ruins. Gran nodded, reminding us that we were deep beneath the earth after all. He asked Gran if the magical machines were truly off, and she nodded that they were finally quiet. Gran asked how he made it stop, and he just shrugged, saying he'd touched a couple of things and that was all it took. Gran asked if he had also broken Yumi's shield, and she was so angry. He recalled that and reassured Gran that it would be okay, promising just to rewrite the spell once more. Gran stared at him in disbelief and asked if he had any idea how hard it was to rewrite a spell, noting that even a good magician would need several minutes just to do it. Gran also told him that Yumi's was a top-tier magician who was still affected, which made him wonder if the magic of rewriting spells had been forgotten over time. He promised Gran they'd lift the barrier once they were back in the village, and he urged them to check out a mysterious hidden chamber deeper inside the ruin. Soon after, the two reached a huge door, and Gran wondered if this was the deepest room of all. Gran felt the door and found it stubbornly shut, so he explained that ruins like this only open when a special condition is met, perhaps something we need to activate from the room we just left. He said heading back was a hassle, but he double-checked and confirmed that feature didn't exist. With his hand on the door, he guessed there might be another way out. The moment his hand touched the door, the crystal glowed. A voice inside declared that his magic was real and matched the Hunt King Larusia Nord, then asked if he wanted to open the lock. He was shocked to see the door recognize him as the Demon Lord and swing open right away. The system accepted the order, and the crystal started to spin. The door swung open, and he turned to Gran to ask if they should go through, but Gran stuttered and gave a shaky yes. As soon as he stepped inside, he stopped dead in his tracks, staring in shock at a huge white room, holding a giant white pod right in the middle, which he knew was a last-chance sleep pod built to save the Demon Clan if they ever lost the war to humans. He moved forward, beads of sweat on his forehead, wondering if the search had worked and if anyone was home. His legs shook as he stepped forward, driven by the hope of seeing an old friend once more. As he approached the capsule, he quietly hoped someone was waiting inside. He peeked inside and saw Iris sleeping soundly. He remembered forgetting her last birthday, and even though he was ready to die in the war, tears filled his eyes with joy that after thousands of years, he was finally seeing Iris again. Gran shouted from behind, asking what was going on and why a stranger was there, clearly failing to realize Iris was an ancient demon because people in the modern world rarely know about such dark creatures. He said he wasn't certain, but he thought she might still be alive and urged them to open the capsule and take a look. Gran scratched his head in confusion and asked how they were going to open it. He stopped talking, hoping that if the system worked just like before, he could turn it on. He reached out and touched the capsule with his power, and a system voice then asked if he wanted to stop the hibernation. He nodded and ordered them to save the person inside first. The system heard the order and started pulling the wires from the capsule as the glass slid open to reveal her breathing, confirming to Gran that she was alive. He waited with a happy smile, remembering how his friend Bacchus had bragged about his daughter being born in a month and how thrilled he was, only for him to reply that as a father he couldn't quite imagine it himself. Another memory surfaced of Bacchus, tears streaming down his face as he told Iris how beautifully she had grown, always meeting him with a bright, warm smile. The glass capsule slowly gave way, letting Iris fall out. She slowly blinked her eyes open, saw them standing there, and instantly got mad. Gran noticed something had changed in her and warned everyone that she had become dangerous. She swung wildly, knocking Gran straight into the wall. He asked what she was doing, but then he suddenly realized something, and for that moment he felt completely human. As she stepped out of the capsule, the memories of the endless war between humans and demons came flooding back. Iris glared, saw a human, and fired a deadly magic spell at him while he stood frozen in horror. As she let the magic go and promised her uncle she would get revenge, she was stunned to see him suddenly taking her power. He blended his strength with hers and gave her a gentle smile, convinced that her magic had grown stronger. He then recalled that when he lived as the Demon King, he used to make glowing magic balls and juggle them while playing with his brother's children. He made a swarm of magic spheres and juggled them, leaving Iris completely stunned. She held back tears and called out to him, "Uncle." He spoke softly, telling her that her uncle had come to see her. She was so shocked and overwhelmed that she ran straight to him, wrapped her arms around him tightly, and cried into his shoulder. He felt it was odd to suddenly be standing right up to her shoulder. He peeked over at Gran to check on him and felt relieved to see him snoring peacefully. Gran just lost consciousness, but she was still alive. Still, he remembered that the magic bullet Iris fired back then was almost as powerful as one from a trained soldier, even though her magic wasn't fully grown yet. She stared at him with watery eyes and a runny nose, making him turn around laughing, while she shouted that he was terrible and that she had been waiting all along to get revenge. But then she stopped and looked right at him. She started asking a flood of questions about why his voice sounded strange, what was wrong with his body, if he was hiding from the heroes, what day it was, and what was happening now. But he told her to slow down and explain things one by one, so she apologized and asked if the person they'd thrown away earlier, Gran, was okay, and he confirmed that he was still alive. She asked if Gran was a friend he knew and wondered how to react, so he confirmed she did know Gran and told her she should say sorry to him later. He then shared that he had just met Gran, but found him to be a very kind man. He suggested calling the attack an accident to make things okay, which made her think he was incredibly smart. He spun around and said it would be strange if Gran woke up, so he sat down. He asked her to sit down and chat for a bit while Gran woke up, since he had so many questions to ask, and she happily agreed. Once they sat down, he asked if she could really believe he was the Demon King she saw right now. She said it wasn't difficult to do at all. She knew her uncle was her uncle without a single doubt, so when he asked how she could be so sure, she had no trouble answering. She explained that he had juggled the magic bullets earlier, and among the demons, he was the only one strong enough to control so many. He wondered if her father Bacchus could manage it, but she shook her head, reminding him that her dad was never any good with mana, and he had to agree. She mentioned that her grandfather Mythos could do it too, but he was only interested in his research. Her older sister Rome was quite clumsy, but he smiled and even got teary-eyed listening to her tales. He realized that even though these were just ordinary memories, they had always felt this way. Right then, he saw that he loved his brothers much more than he ever imagined. She apologized, fearing it might bring back pain, but he gently told her it was actually safe to remember. He was content just listening to her, and admitted he felt relieved at least for that moment. She stared at him with worry, pointing out that he was clearly a young human, and asked once more what was really going on. He paused, stuck on how to explain that even though Iris wasn't a demon who hated humans, her strange look made him think she was still having trouble believing what was happening. He squeezed her hand hard and whispered that he was actually a soul reborn in this world. Iris looked puzzled and asked what he was talking about when he mentioned being born again. She also asked if he was saying that after he died, he came back as a human after a long time. He agreed she was right and explained that his current self was born of gentle and kind human parents. For a moment she went quiet before sharing that those words brought her relief, knowing he was already content living as a human. She realized there was no reason left to see people as her enemies. She confessed that she once threw herself into his revenge with such fury that it turned him into a statue. Panicking at his reaction, she quickly tried to explain that she didn't mean it, insisting that even if her actions were violent, she hadn't done anything truly horrible. For instance, she said they once gathered a horde of demons to strike at the human army, or slipped threatening notes under soldiers' pillows warning them they could be killed anytime, so she swore they always kept their actions just that far. But he thought that was too far-fetched and wondered if the demons were truly gone since they were still causing all this trouble. Pate said it would be no surprise if humans decided to go on a hunt to catch demons. She agreed that just as he said, a similar campaign had happened before, and those problems would surely have been wiped out. He stared in shock that the fight against demons had ended, unable to believe that people would forget how they once united in hate. She explained that the storm wasn't over, but it just couldn't go on any longer. The world had split into two camps, one led by the church and the other by the hero who had defeated the villain. He stood frozen in shock, unable to believe the knight had actually kept her promise. Iris laughed at the twist, noting that the ones who had slain the Demon King were now guarding its people. He asked what became of humanity after that, but she said she didn't know. She told how she was caught during a guerrilla mission and woke up already deep in a heavy sleep. Curious, he asked just who could catch a demon without getting hurt. She answered that the magical device blocking thoughts made it hard to tell, but judging by the scent and shape, she thought it was a woman. She told him she didn't know why the woman did what she did, but looking back she was truly thankful because that moment was how they met again. He called her name with a heavy heart, and she clung to his clothes tightly. She told him that while they were together, she was truly happy. Even though work kept him busy, he always found time to play with her and celebrated her birthday every single year. When she heard the news of his death that day, she felt she would never be able to talk to him like that again. She felt like everything had just been a dream and begged him to stop pushing himself so hard. He softly patted her head and apologized, promising that now that he was human, this would never happen again. She told him she'd be happy if things stayed the same, asked how she could stay by his side now that he was human, and wondered if the other demons knew. He spoke with a heavy heart, begging her to pay close attention. The time when humans lived was long gone, and more than 1,000 years had passed since then. This changed everything. She asked him with a heavy heart if he really believed the demon had been destroyed. He answered that some might still be alive, but Diankind was now so old it was just a legend. She admitted she thought she was ready for this, but now that she was suddenly apart from the people she loved, she was finally starting to feel it, while he looked at her with a heavy heart, knowing that after he died, Iris would be about 10 years old and had likely already watched her friends die. He gripped his fist so hard, wishing he could have saved Diankind to stop all this from happening. He apologized and took her by surprise, yet she softened into a gentle smile and told him it was okay. She stood up and told him he'd already done his best, adding that without him as their king, the demons never would have survived as long as they did. He was the light for them all, and that's why everything was okay now. When she spoke, it took him completely by surprise. He smiled to himself, thinking that Bacchus's daughter had grown up splendidly. She explained that while demons were just legends, if she were ever spotted they would capture her, so he comforted her by saying Gran, the giant she knocked away earlier, is now adventuring with Yumis, an ancient being, to keep her safe. But Gran had no idea he'd been fighting a demon, and she knew this wasn't something ordinary people talked about. So he managed to convince his mom, and now they're finally free to leave together. Gran suddenly woke up with a sharp pain at the back of his head. He watched them chatting and heard Iris say she'd like to move in with him. Gran remembered her earlier attack, and panic washed over him. He shouted so loudly that they looked up and asked what was happening, which made Iris stare right at Gran. He shouted once more to tell Gran that it must have been a misunderstanding, and Iris promised she would never attack again. Gran stood there, stunned by what she saw and completely baffled by the whole thing. He stepped closer, admitting he didn't get it but confirming their bloodlust was gone, then asked Iris why she attacked him. She froze in panic, stumbling over words to admit it was a mix-up, then begged forgiveness for her mistake even though she knew it might be too late. Gran asked if seeking revenge so young was the reason she became such a powerful mage. He asked if life had been so hard, and she nodded with a sad smile. Gran nodded with a smile, saying that if that's how it happened, they should just call it an accident. She smiled and thanked him, but Gran waved it off, saying the fancy talk didn't fit him at all. Gran asked if they should return to the village, and what to do about the girl, and he said he wanted to talk about that. He explained to Gran that Iris had been caught in an enemy trap, seemed to have fallen into a deep sleep with no one to help her, and that he thought she might be able to live safely in the village. Gran nodded, admitting it made sense since Iris would likely end up in the city's dangerous slum. He suggested they head to the village for now, and Iris happily agreed. Okay, before they stepped out of the ruined building where Gran wondered if it belonged to the ancient demons, and he simply said he had the same question. Even though he couldn't prove it, he was sure the place was connected to them. He felt thankful for the ruin because it was where he met Iris, and while he couldn't tell the truth about ancient demons and his own power to most people, he finally could speak freely to the only one who truly understood him. Iris caught him staring and smiled, which made his heart feel warm. Gran said it was moving, but since US wasn't there that day, they'd have to do a full check again later. He noted that finding such a remarkable ruin meant they'd be kept busy from now on. He jokingly asked Gran if that meant he was about to become famous and admitted he was jealous of him. But Gran asked what he meant when he would be busy too, leaving him confused until Iris explained that since he had explored the ruin with them, he would also be recognized for his achievements. He argued that nobody would take his claim seriously as just a 7-year-old, but Gran insisted everyone would believe him, especially since he was the one who would tell the story, and his words left him stunned. Gran added that his mouth was as light as feathers, and that Yumi's would likely chatter away about how he messed with her barrier, especially since they both knew exactly how much she loved to drink. He froze in fear and begged Gran to stay right where she was. He didn't want to hide, he just didn't want the whole world to know he was the Demon Lord, because drawing too much attention and getting involved sounded like a huge hassle. Gran saw him lost in thought and soothed him, saying his teasing was just a joke, and promised to keep his mouth shut about the awards unless Gran told him to speak up later. He told Gran that a top-tier adventurer's jokes were first-rate, and when Gran reminded him she started it all, he finally got it. Her earlier comment was just a comeback to his own joke, proving she had no plans to spread rumors and that they might even be trustworthy enough to talk to about kind. He started walking, figuring they'd head back tomorrow, or the next day so he could think it over, but then the ruin behind them suddenly collapsed. They spun around in shock just as it shattered into pieces. Gran froze at the scene, but he stepped forward to calm the man, telling him that accidents like this happen. Gran sighed sadly, saying he'd grown used to it, which happened often whenever he was with Yumi's. As they stepped closer to the broken remains, Gran sighed and noted that all that remained of their discovery was the village's magic machine and the scattered pieces of the giant constructs. Iris asked if that was still better than nothing, and Gran nodded, but then he suddenly fell silent. Confused, Iris asked why, only for Gran to warn her that Yumi's would start crying about it. A moment later, they were heading back to the village, and he felt nervous knowing he had carelessly changed Yumi's powerful magic and her proud barrier. That made him think Yumi's might still be trapped inside the barrier, so when they arrived and Gran shouted that they were back, he suddenly froze in terror at the sight of Yumi still standing there, radiating a dark, scary energy and glaring at them with pure rage. Just as he was about to explain, she snapped at him, calling him an idiot and shouting that he had gone off alone without listening to anyone, then demanded to know why he changed the spell formulas and what the barrier was even supposed to do. He spun around to ask Gran and Iris for help, but Gran just shook his head and said that once Yumi started, she wouldn't stop. Iris just smiled, feeling warm and nostalgic as she watched him get scolded. He shouted to see if he was being heard and warned that being trapped by machines after leaving the barrier would have been a disaster. She yelled that he couldn't have been saved in such a case and kept scolding him until he spun around and slowly fell to the ground. A few moments later, Yumi settled down and asked if he got it, and he answered that he understood perfectly. She told him that Rusty and the others were safe at home and that his parents still didn't know about his magic. So she just let them know he was with Gran and totally safe. After agreeing to handle the small details himself and thanking her, he was stunned when Iris effortlessly shattered the impenetrable barrier she'd failed to break for so long, only to smile calmly and ask if she'd gotten it right. He shouted at Iris with worry, while Yumi shook from fear. Iris told me Yomis had been scolding him so much, so she just wanted a tiny bit of revenge on him since he was her subject. He told her she should have just stopped Yumi's from scolding him, but Iris replied that she understood why US was angry, so she wouldn't dare interrupt, and said that since so much had happened today, they should stop for now and regroup tomorrow. He had Yumis he'd take them back to the inn, so she agreed but kept staring at Iris until he pointed at both of them and ordered them to explain everything properly tomorrow. She stepped away, and Gran told him to lead the way, so he did. Soon they reached Luru's home, where he spotted his mom waiting right outside. He jumped when he saw her standing there with a blank stare fixed on him. She asked him where he had been, and he said he had only walked a short way to the ruins. All of a sudden, his mother gave him a hard slap. He stayed calm and just watched her as she started to cry. She walked up to him, dropped to her knees, and gave him a tight, warm hug. Shaking with fear, she asked if he realized just how worried she was. He admitted it was his fault, but said he had to leave, knowing he had to go himself. She was shocked by his honesty, smiled, and knew there was no other choice. She then turned to Gran and asked if he had been helpful. Gran explained that he was truly helpful because his magic machine in the ruins was about to attack the village, and if Luru hadn't stopped it, everyone would have been in danger. She felt relieved and wondered if it meant Luru had learned fighting from Patrick, but Gran knew to keep quiet. Amaz's mother saw Iris and asked her who she was, then questioned if Iris really wasn't from the village. Iris stepped forward with a gentle smile, warmly welcoming her and telling her who she was. She said that because of some trouble, she had been sleeping in the ruins when they saved her, and Luru's mother stood up to ask what she meant by ruins. But Iris told us that after losing a dear one, she sought revenge by walking straight into an enemy's trap. After many long years, Luru's parents were likely gone, but her mother Iris stepped forward to hug her tightly and say how hard it must have been to have no one to depend on when you were so young. She then made it clear that Iris had to move in with them. Iris politely refused food and shelter after being saved, but Luru's mother insisted she wasn't being modest. She looked at Luru and asked if he really wanted Iris to join their family. He stumbled for a second before saying it was okay. Even though he'd planned to convince his mom, the whole thing had turned upside down. His mother, bursting with joy, invited Iris to join their family as their own daughter. She grabbed Iris's shoulders with excitement and yelled that she'd write to Patrick right away, sure he'd say yes instantly. Iris tried to soothe her by calling her madam, but she refused and made her call her mother instead. Iris was shocked, yet she still went with them. Lulu's mom scooped her up, cheered that she was adorable, and declared her to be her very own daughter. Iris stared at him in pure panic, silently begging for help, but he just shook his head, telling her to let go of her fears and accept the love being offered. Gran asked if it wasn't a lucky thing since becoming a noble's daughter was hard work, then said his goodbyes and headed back to the inn, reminding Luru to bring Iris after breakfast the next morning for a serious chat, to which Luru happily agreed. His mother gently led Iris toward bed to rest early, while Gran quietly stepped away to let her know he appreciated it. Luru stared at the two women, shocked that his friend's daughter had become his new sister, though he was happy that everyone was safe. The next morning, he and Iris walked right up to the inn. He slipped into Gran and Yumi's room to apologize for being late, only to freeze when Yumis looked at him with serious eyes and told him that he was the one who was late. She then pointed and asked where we should start. Once everyone was seated, he asked what they were going to talk about. Gran started by asking if he'd really messed with Yumi's barrier the day before and learned that trick. He said the secret meant everything to him and he'd share it, but only if they promised right there to keep it safe. Yumi nodded, promised she'd keep it a secret, and swore she wouldn't say a word to anyone. But when he gazed at her, a red line surrounded her, and he spoke quietly to tell her she was not telling the truth. He told us he'd put a truth spell in the room. She said she felt no magic in the air, yet he just asked if they should try it, then switched topics to ask about her favorite food, to which she simply said meat. Next he asked her who her best friend was, and she said Melia. Then he asked what she'd want to be if reborn, and she said a bird, so he told her seriously that her answers had been lies from the start and asked if he was right, leaving her shocked. She confirmed the spell was cast and promised to keep his secret safe, yet admitted she still had to tell the guildmaster because, as adventurers, reporting big discoveries was their duty. He told her he understood how she felt, but he couldn't speak the truth unless a magic spell forced him to. Gran explained to Yumi that this was why he had warned her not to treat Luru like just any kid, and Yumi asked if that was how Gran saw things. She told me she had barely talked to him before and just wanted to get a real feel for who he was. She said she was sorry for trying that, and he could tell she meant every word. He asked if she would still report the secret, and she said she'd try to hide it as long as she could, but if the guildmaster demanded it, she'd have no choice but to obey. She then asked if she was right to think he could use contract magic, and if he could teach her something that could be bound that way. She admitted she didn't ask because the tricky magic fix sounded too much trouble to bother reporting, but since she couldn't talk about it, reporting it was impossible anyway. He got it, and went to ask Gran if that was okay. Gran replied that he never meant to tell anyone, saying that while the guild rules were strict, since the journey ended with nothing to show for it, a small lie in the report wouldn't hurt. Hearing that made him smile, confirming that they were the carefree pair he had always thought they were. He then asked Iris if she agreed to it too, and she said yes as long as he liked it, so he lifted his little finger and declared that they should make a deal. His power filled the room as he told Yumis and Gran that he was ready to share secrets about himself and Iris, but no one else could ever know them. He threw out magical chains that quickly wrapped around Yumi's and Gran, tying up their mouths, necks, and bodies all at once. He then quietly explained that while they might not believe him, he and Iris were actually old demons. The news left Yumi completely stunned and absolutely shocked. Yumis asked what silly nonsense he was saying, then stopped to wonder if that was even the right thing to say. He admitted he didn't know exactly what to expect, but seeing their faces, it felt like they had turned into legendary heroes straight out of an old storybook. Suddenly, Yumi jumped to her feet and shouted, "Didn't it just become obvious?" She shouted that she had studied it all on her own, yet these ancient demons belonged to a world built on lies, wild exaggerations, and crazy dreams. She pressed him for proof that he could change magic spells, and he admitted it was hard to explain but insisted his very ability was proof enough, then asked if she truly thought such a feat was so simple. Yumi sat back down, speechless and defeated, realizing the challenge was far harder than she thought. Gran said that while he had always known Luru wasn't normal, learning he was an old demon was a whole new shock. Gran told him that since his parents were nobles, his name should be in the family tree, yet here he was pretending to be from an old demon race. He admitted the question made sense, but since reincarnation was a strange trick only demons knew, he wasn't sure how to explain it without confusing them. He suddenly remembered the question they had asked earlier about what they'd want to be if reborn, so he checked back with Yumi, who confirmed she remembered and proudly explained that she understood the romantic idea of souls cycling through, though he couldn't help but wonder how a secret demon truth had spread to humans after their kind was crushed in war. He explained that knowing this would make things easier, revealing that he was once an ancient demon reborn as a human, which is why he and his parents looked the way they did. Gran and Yumi stood frozen in shock, finally understanding that rebirth was real. He admitted that he died in a past life for a specific reason, that he and Iris knew each other before, and that finding themselves together in the ruins was just a lucky accident. Gran asked Iris if the story she told him in the ruins about revenge had been made up. She told him it wasn't a lie because she had truly lost someone very important to her, and that someone was Luru. Gran stared at Iris with a puzzled frown until Iris stepped in to explain everything. She told us that Luru was a close friend of her father and always made time to take good care of her when he could. Even though she was young, she knew how much she loved him. But back then, the war was everywhere, and nobody could run away from it. She explained that Luru had always stood right in the heart of the battle, so much so that none of his people could even get close to him by the end. Because of that, she decided to take revenge on the world that stole him from her. But she got caught in the machine hidden in the ruins and woke up to find everything playing out exactly as Grant had seen. Gran tried to apologize for not trusting her, but she refused to accept it, admitting that while Gran hadn't lied in the ruins, she hadn't told the whole truth either. She told Gran that she was grateful for his forgiveness, and right then Yumi spoke up, asking for a chance to talk. She was okay with calling them ancient demons, but the talk of titles and subjects before that really bothered her. It sounded like Iris was serving Luru, and when they mentioned one ancient demon serving another, he cut her off to agree, admitting he once ruled all demons as the 100th demon king in a past life. Yumi stared in shock, unable to believe the news that he was actually a demon king. He stumbled through his words to say there was no proof, but the real point was that he and Iris were ancient demons, making his title as demon king just another small detail. But Yumi stood up, shouted that it was a huge deal, and demanded to know what he was talking about. She turned to Iris and asked if Luru really was the Demon King, and Iris confirmed that it was true. She proudly shared how Luru's power was so huge that once, in a fight, he blew a hole right through a distant mountain, leaving Yumi shocked and asking how that could have happened. Iris started talking about how a human swordsman had once gone into demon lands, but Gran cut her off and said they should leave that story for later. Gran admitted he was shocked to learn Luru was the Demon King, wondered why he waited to tell them, and asked what it meant, to which Luru just said the story was simple. He wanted to be open and get along with them. He told me that even though he was the reborn Demon King, he was stuck acting like a shy 7-year-old and couldn't do whatever he wanted. Besides, he had started to love village life and planned to stay and learn more about the world beyond. Gran wondered if he was trying to reach out to the world beyond, and if they were to be the link. He said they might not stay connected, but hoped they'd come back to the village as they did this time, which could help him find new friends later, while Gran Shilly reminded them that Luru had big hopes for them even though they weren't exactly full of knowledge. He longed for someone to chat with, and when he asked if it was too much, Gran was surprised by how direct Luru was, quickly assuring him that his wish was far from too much. Gran said that if that was all there was, she didn't mind, though she just wanted to say it. Gran told him that since visiting as adventurers meant they couldn't go often without a reward, he suggested adding one condition. Luru asked what the condition was, but Gran flipped the question and invited him to join their group, leaving Iris confused until Gran explained that a clan was just a loose team of adventurers. He explained that the idea was taking off because it taught new adventurers skills, shared knowledge, and helped them support one another. Luru turned to Gran to ask if he was correct about the rule that you couldn't register as an adventurer until you were 14, and Gran nodded in agreement, explaining that the rule applied once Luru reached that age. He also said they weren't part of any clan yet, so Luru asked which clan Gran meant. Gran just said they'd be one when Luru turned 14, which surprised Yumi's too, so she asked Luru what he thought. Luru was surprised to see Gran go to the trouble of starting a new clan without asking Luru to help, but he realized this was a perfect chance to learn from Gran and the others. He took Gran's hand and said yes. Gran shook hands with Luru, who promised to join their clan once he turned 14 and became an adventurer, making that the price they set for keeping their friendship alive. After Gran waved goodbye and promised they'd build a legendary clan, Us said she'd be back before then, and they all watched them leave. Then Iris got so excited that she told Luru she'd become an adventurer in 7 years. He nodded seriously and called out to her, surprising her, to ask why he'd been reborn as a human and what happened to the world after he lost to the hero, because he needed to know the truth. He asked if she'd join him, and she was so surprised to see her old uncle again that she happily promised to follow him anywhere he went. Then he admitted he needed to win over his mom and others first, but she smiled and said as long as he asked with an honest heart, she didn't see any trouble at all. He nodded, aware they had seen him slip away from the village, yet he still braced himself to hear exactly what they would say. And just then, his mom came running to tell them the sweets were ready, and a moment later they were back home eating cake when she asked if she was right about him planning to leave, and he just nodded and said it made sense. He stopped eating in shock and asked how she knew. She whispered to him that she'd always known he was looking for something he couldn't find there, and she was truly happy he was waiting until he turned 14. That made him wonder if he really wore that same distant look whenever he got lost in thought, especially now that he was stuck thinking about a past he could never go back to. While his mom said she was okay with it, but his dad wasn't so sure. Iris worriedly asked if their father would object, but Luru reassured her that their calm and quietly strong dad was strict only about swordsmanship, making it clear that earning Patrick's approval wouldn't be easy. His mother asked if he'd be ready to face his father with a sword if things got that bad, and he admitted it would be hard since he wasn't very good with it yet, meaning he'd have to practice, which made Iris think he just looked like any ordinary kid in those moments. She couldn't stop worrying that he still carried the regrets of his past from that home, even after growing up there, before they moved to the kitchen where Iris asked if their mother did all the cooking. She said that yes, she asked for it herself, and even the servants loved her food. She then passed the lunchbox to Luru, and he thanked her just like he always did. She wondered if he'd be playing with Rusty and the others again today, and asked him to introduce Iris, so he agreed and she cheered because that was exactly what she expected. She then gave Iris another lunchbox, leaving her puzzled. Iris offered to help wash the dishes, but her mother just smiled, pushed her aside, and told her to have fun. Iris held the lunchbox in her hands and just stared at it. Soon after stepping outside, Luru brought Iris to his friends and told them that she had officially become one of their own. He told Iris that the 3 kids were his old friends and showed her each one. Iris finally saw just how perfectly he could act like one of them. Rusty walked up to her, his face turning red as he nervously reached out to take her hand. She was startled, then recalled her mother's old warnings about demons and silver hair, but Luru told her that thousands of years had changed everything, and she smiled in agreement that this was truly a different time. Time could change even the deepest grudges, so she took Rusty's hand and shook it, only to freeze when she saw Yuri and me staring at her with anger. She wondered if they still hated demons, but reminded herself that nobody knew what they looked like in this time, and besides, she wasn't the one standing out. Who really broke her own thoughts to ask Rusty if they were really going to practice swordsmanship, leaving Iris confused while the other 2 girls looked annoyed. Rusty stumbled away and yelled at everyone to move on. Iris looked at me and Yuri, wondering if Rusty had made a mistake since they were both giving him such angry stares. Me and Yuri shared a silent glance with each other. Me asked Yuri if Iris was just unaware that Rusty was blushing, and Yuri said she didn't seem to notice it. Me said Rusty turned as red as a tomato because Iris was so cute and made his face blush. Yuri worriedly asked what would happen if Rusty fell in love too fast, then apologized to Iris and told her to leave Rusty alone if she wasn't really interested. Iris was shocked at first, but then she smiled as the pieces finally clicked into place. Me scolded her for laughing, and Iris quickly apologized, saying she never meant to mock Rusty. She finally admitted she had been blind, and when Yuri confirmed she'd said oblivious, Iris nodded and explained that while she felt sorry for Rusty, her heart already belonged to someone else. Me and Yuri asked Iris to share the identity of their secret admirer, and when she said he was older than her, the girls felt a wave of relief because it meant Rusty wasn't involved. Yuri then asked how many years older he was. Iris paused, then admitted it probably wasn't just a decade or 2, but she had no idea how to figure out the real time. Yes, 2 girls gasped, their cheeks turning red as they realized Iris was talking about an adult, and they gushed that she was way too mature for her age. Me and Yuri glanced around, trying to figure out who that older man might be. Knowing it was either Gran or Patrick, they seized her hands and promised that while the road ahead would be hard, they would stand by her side. Iris felt lost, but had no choice but to go along with it, realizing she'd slipped up and given a vague answer without thinking. She suddenly recalled how, long ago, she used to have these same talks with her old friends, back when she couldn't tell if her feelings were just affection or something much deeper. Before she could even learn the truth, Luru was killed, leaving her forever unable to see her friends or family again. She blinked back to reality when someone called her name. Yuri noticed Yuri was lost in thought and called her to join the group, and after a stunned pause, Yuri smiled at the thought that these girls were her first true friends, feeling comforted to know she still had Luru, the one person who mattered most, by her side. She silently vowed to give everything this time so she'd never regret it. A few minutes later, while Luru and Rusty practiced with their swords, the 3 girls sat nearby and watched them train. Yuri told Iris how shocked she was by Luru, realizing Iris didn't know about it, and then explained that she'd heard about how Iris was rescued from the ruins. Mi said that the giants from last week were taken down by Luru, and Yuri agreed. Mi guessed that Luru must be strong because he was Patrick's son, but Yuri replied that he was also strong because he worked hard on his own. While Iris listened to how Luru had been packing lunchboxes and training hard every morning, she suddenly had a new idea. The following morning, Iris walked into the kitchen and spoke to their mother just as she was getting ready to cook. She leaned in and asked what it was. Iris paused, shyly unsure, before finally whispering that she had a favor to ask. Her mother, Media, eagerly asked what her daughter needed and happily declared that any request from Iris felt like a dream come true, but Iris stammered, nervously asking if it was still okay to be her daughter even though she was a bit late to ask. Media lowered herself to Iris's level and softly asked if she had been worried about something like that and if she was right to think Iris had lost her parents. Media hugged her and explained that time had slipped away, and seeing Iris made her want to adopt her with all her heart. Iris was shocked that the media cared so much about her, especially since she hadn't even told them everything yet. Media shared that she felt everyone needed someone to lean on and a safe place to always come back to, no matter what life threw at them. She promised Iris that she really wanted to give her that kind of place. She wondered if it was about Luru, and Iris asked if that was the reason, only to hear that Iris cared so much because Luru was the first person she saw when she woke up in the ruins. She had noticed that Iris seemed to have special feelings for him, or at least that's what she thought. Iris pointed out she wasn't officially adopted, and when Media teased her about treating her like a servant, Iris agreed, only for Media to gently pat her head and say that, along with Luru, she wanted to be a home where they could both truly belong. Iris froze at those words, realizing with a jolt that her family had slipped away behind her before she could even see it change. And now Luru and his parents were slowly becoming something Iris truly admired, so she chose to live her life embracing that feeling. Everyone was shocked to see her tears brought on by painful memories, so they quickly said sorry for hurting her feelings. She then nudged Iris, pointing out that she still hadn't said yes to the favor. Iris said she wanted Media to teach her how to cook, which made Media pause and feel confused. Iris shared how Media had taught her a bit long ago, but she guessed her older brother had gotten used to Media's new food, so she wanted to learn to cook it herself, and Luru noticed Media's excitement at her shyness and instantly said yes. Then she told Iris that the kingdom's laws allowed even siblings to marry as long as they weren't related by blood, which made Iris feel even more embarrassed. Even so, the Media agreed she should seize the moment to fix Luru's stomach and show her the perfect dishes to win back her husband Patrick. Then the news spread that Luru was strangely clingy to Iris, making her wonder if having a little sister changed him, while Iris guessed he just liked her because she was a friend's daughter, though she admitted the situation felt a bit too perfect to be true. Iris then confidently told Media she'd do her best, which made Media cheerfully exclaim that was exactly the spirit she wanted to see. A few minutes later, while they are busy cooking, he asks Media how she first met Patrick. She says they first met 15 years ago when she was still a priestess. This shocks Iris, so she rushes to ask if Media was really a priestess. When she finally told them about her past as a wandering priestess of a religion from the end times, they were shocked to learn she had never shared this before. Even though she wasn't very high up, her religion was still one of the biggest groups around back then. As a wandering priestess, she was warmly welcomed in every town, had plenty of work, and gave her very best. Iris can't believe it, since priestesses used to channel holy power strong enough to slay their evil foes right where they stood. But since the news hadn't warned her of this, she began to wonder if the church had finally changed its ways in these modern times. Media laughs and admits it feels a little silly now. She remembers a terrifying ride in a carriage along a mountain road when monsters suddenly attacked them. Even with guards around, the monsters were so tough that she truly believed she was about to die. Luckily, Patrick showed up right on time to keep her safe. Afterward, he turned around to check if she was hurt, and although he sounded rough like an old man, she suddenly felt sure that was the man she was meant to marry. Iris, confused, wonders why she told him she was marrying him when she only meant she wanted to. Media laughed again, saying she knew it would happen, then asked where he was from, thanked him, and once they parted, she immediately asked to be moved to a church near his work. Iris was shocked to see how determined she had really been. The media says that loving someone means giving them your all right now, but the real test is what happens next. Back then, Patrick was the most popular guy around because he was handsome and a rising knight, so every girl liked him. Every day, women would meet outside the fortress where he worked, slipping gifts to the guards just to get close enough to reach him. Back then, Patrick was just an ordinary knight, yet he received so many gifts like sword belts and clothes that his room overflowed, so he gave them to other soldiers, which made media decide to give him something that wouldn't be thrown away so easily. She walked up to the guard on duty, told him she was the woman Patrick had helped on the mountain path, and handed him a basket to pass along to Patrick if he wasn't too busy. When Iris wonders what it was, media says it's food Patrick ate, and the returned container holds a letter from him thanking her and asking if she'd like to go somewhere together. Iris gives media a soft smile, knowing she finally won Patrick over with his favorite food. She starts to hope her plan might work too, so she asks media if it will help Luru, and media says it should, since Luru is a bit like Patrick. She asks Iris if the thought makes her want to try, and Iris, giggling a little, admits that it does. Filled with new energy, media sets his heart on teaching Iris the secret cooking tricks Luru loves, while Iris beams with excitement, eager to learn them. Later they sit on a mat outside while Iris has sandwiches ready for them. Luru takes a bite and asks if she made them, and the reply is yes, though with some help from their mother. Shili tweaks the seasoning to match a recent dish she made, and Luru realizes that's why it tastes so delicious. He then says that if he ever becomes an adventurer, he plans to hunt for ingredients from the demon tribes and try cooking their dishes. He asks out loud if it's okay to call on her for help later, and she says yes right away. He tells her they'll take a quick break before resuming their training, and she notices he looks extra motivated today. He nods and says their dad will be back tomorrow. The next day, a carriage rolled into the village and someone stepped right out. The man takes off his glasses to look at him and says it's been a long time. That man is the handsome father. He grabbed Patrick's bag and asked if he could stay, but Patrick said he couldn't stay long, only enough time to help train him and Rusty. He said he got it and thought Rusty was totally fired up this time. He told Patrick to warn Rusty not to push himself too hard, which made Patrick wonder if something bad had happened, only to hear back that an explanation was coming later because a lot had changed recently. Patrick nodded and went along with him, keeping up his question about where the media was. He said the media was at home cooking lunch with Iris, which left Patrick completely puzzled. Patrick remembered reading in a letter that Iris would be staying with their adopted daughter, and while he wondered why that might happen, he quickly replied that he didn't mind at all because Iris was polite and a good girl. Patrick, caught off guard by the compliment, jokingly asked Iris if she was his girlfriend. He told her there was no room for a girlfriend there, especially since she was about to become his sister. He added that Patrick wouldn't know, but Iris was really the daughter of a friend. Patrick then told him that the kingdom's laws allowed marrying a non-blood sibling, with the custom being to wed first and then move into the other family's home. But he made it clear that the problem wasn't about the law. Patrick guessed that Iris was more like a sister to him and that a romance was unlikely, and she nodded, confirming that was exactly how she saw it too. A few minutes later, they got home and Iris and the other maids greeted Patrick. Patrick happily shouted that he was home and said things must have been really hard for media, but she just smiled and told him she was fine. Patrick spotted Iris, asked if she was really Iris, and she shyly nodded yes. He smiled and shared that he'd heard all about her from the news, thanked her for the delicious meal, and invited everyone inside to chat in the dining room, where Patrick soon explained that magical tools were becoming a hot trend among the nobles in the capital, with many important families using them and even importing them from far away. His family heard his tale and realized asking Gran for help was the right call, especially since his father's own stories were always fun but too simple for grown-ups. Since Patrick was just a knight, the complex information was too hard for him to understand, and he knew he couldn't hear all the important details. Patrick turned to the media and started a conversation about the letter's contents. She smiled sweetly and asked if he meant adopting Iris as their daughter, noting that it wouldn't be a bad idea since the little girl was so adorable. Patrick nodded right away, saying that Iris sounded like a nice girl who was getting along just fine with Luru. Iris bowed to thank him for his kind words, and Patrick chuckled at her politeness before promising to send the forms to the royal capital once he returned, earning him warm cheers from the crowd. Reed watched his family get along, then frowned because he knew he had to speak up. He told Patrick he had something important to discuss, and when Patrick asked what it was, LaRue said that once he turned 14, he wanted to be an adventurer. Patrick reassured them that despite the nobility's complicated rules, it was doable, and even if Luru became an adventurer, the family estate would still be safe because they could always adopt someone to inherit it. But he warned that being an adventurer wasn't as easy as it sounded, so a challenge had to be set. Patrick challenged him to master swordsmanship by his 14th birthday, and Luru smiled with fire in his eyes at his father's words. Patrick said that without reaching that level he would die fast even as an adventurer, and Luru saw the same fierce fire in his father's eyes as he had once seen in the warriors who challenged him when he was the Demon King. He understood and promised to become a swordsman his father would honor by his 14th birthday. Patrick felt proud that his son was determined to get strong, so he told him he would succeed, while the laughing media jokingly said she'd have to make lunch for him the next day too, and Patrick happily said yes. Iris whispered her joy to Luru, who nodded back before checking his own hand and realizing he still had far to go in his sword skills, strength, and magic. Despite the road ahead being full of trouble, he still smiled. A few days later, at the training ground, Rusty surged forward and slashed his sword at Luru. Luru quickly dodged the blow and struck back, but Rusty was ready to block it too. He asked Rusty if he could keep up with that speed, and Rusty replied that he had improved thanks to Patrick's intense training, getting faster at quick moves even if his counters still needed work, so Luru offered to teach him to surprise Patrick next time, which made Rusty jump at the chance. While everyone else was busy, Iris just sat quietly on the side and watched them. She knew that while Luru trained with Rusty in sword fighting, he was also secretly practicing magic at dawn when no one was watching. She thought that even though Luru wasn't as busy as when he was the Demon King, his new life hadn't made him any less occupied. But she was glad to see that he looked much happier now. Even so, she felt wrong to work less than Luru while he put in his best effort. Finally, someone called out to her from behind. She turned around and saw me and Yuri coming up to her to ask for a favor. Yuri and me asked Iris to be their mentor, and she was totally shocked by that. She admitted she could dance well, but wasn't good at other skills, only for me to shout that they were looking for a combat teacher, not a dancer. Iris asked if the surprise was truly for them, and Yuri confirmed it while apologizing for bringing it up so suddenly. Me told me she tried to stop Rusty from becoming an adventurer, but Rusty wouldn't quit. Yuri warned that at this pace, Rusty would definitely leave the village, which was exactly why they'd chosen to become adventurers and needed to learn how to fight. Yuri kept talking, saying they had told Luru their decision just a few days before. Luru was shocked at first that they actually wanted to go on adventures. Once they warned that Rusty couldn't go alone, he realized they meant to stay right by his side. Yuri explained that this was why they needed to train, then asked Luru if Patrick would be willing to help them out. Luru said Patrick might teach them, but instead of just learning to fight with swords, he suggested they train as helpers who stay at a distance, which left them confused and asking what he meant. He explained that mid-range support meant using magic or tactics from the back to help the front fighters, and since strengthening that team would give the swordsmen more freedom, they needed to ask Iris for help because she was the best at close combat. Yuri turned to Iris, telling her they came because she knew magic and was strong, and she agreed that Luru's idea was the best. She said she was happy to teach them, but warned that her special methods would make the training very hard. Yuri and me quickly told her they were totally fine with it, and even said the tougher the better, which really surprised Iris. She asked them why they were willing to travel so far, and me answered with confidence that it was because they just wanted to stay with Rusty. She said that whenever something caught Rusty's eye, he'd chase it down without a second thought. Iris froze, startled to see Me's face fall as she remembered the giant in the ruins. Who remembered how brave Rusty really was, but back then, fear had kept them hiding behind him, and if that scary moment ever happened again, it would be a regret they could never forget. Yuri said that since they were in their current situation, staying around would only make them a burden. That's why they couldn't just trail Rusty, they had to grow strong enough to stand between him and any danger. Hearing this, Iris was reminded of the time she wished to be stronger. She stood up and told them she understood their feelings and their deep need to protect someone they care about. So she agreed to help, but warned them that since they wanted the toughest training possible, she wouldn't hold back and asked if they were truly ready. Yuri and me were scared by the fierce red glow in her eyes, but they stammered through their fear and begged her to teach them. A moment later, Luru and Rusty were wrapping up their practice and heading home when Rusty said he was finally getting the hang of it, but Luru reminded him that real fighting was still far away, and they should just rest. Then suddenly they heard shouting nearby. Both of them froze in their tracks when they saw Iris yelling at me and Yuri not to take a break, warning that enemies always pick on tired targets and that our friends could die while we slack off. Luru and Rusty froze in shock as they watched me and Yuri struggle to stand, shaking, while Iris kept screaming that if they cared about their friends, they had to kill the enemy before the enemy killed them. Rusty and Luru were both terrified by Iris's cruelty, but Luru realized this harsh training from a crazy demon general was exactly how she had become so strong in just a few years. Luru turned to Rusty and asked if they should keep practicing a little longer before going back, and Rusty said yes. Luru smiled, knowing there was no time to rest because 7 years would vanish in a blink, and the moment of truth would arrive much sooner than they imagined. 14 years later, the day he must finally face his father has come. Media and Iris stepped back to watch Patrick and Luru face off, with Patrick telling him he'd been waiting for this moment. Luru answered that he had been waiting for it too. Patrick said that since this was their last match, they needed to remember the rules. Only swords were allowed, and no magic. He explained that even though Luru had grown strong, Patrick could still crush him with raw power, so he wore a special magic device to carefully balance their strength and make the fight fair. Luru admitted that it would come down to raw skill, and Patrick agreed that was exactly what they were up against. Luru told himself that he was learning to use a sword just to hide his powers as a king and save them for later. If he doesn't trust only his sword, the whole test is pointless. Patrick noted that Luru had grown strong and felt he would soon outshine him, then asked if that was Luru's aim. Luru nodded in agreement and stated that if he could beat him, he planned to take over as the Royal Knight's new swordmaster. Patrick was caught off guard by his son's words, then told him that taking over meant he'd never have to look for a successor. But for now, he refused to leave his job, especially since he still had a wife to take care of. Luru replied that the job was serious, but since his sister stood by him, he couldn't afford to lose either of them. Patrick laughed at Luru's improved speech, lifted his wooden sword, and asked if it was time to start, to which Luru agreed, admitting that despite his newfound strength, his human form still couldn't compare to his days as the Demon King. He watched Patrick closely, listening to his breathing and hearing his muscles shift, but he still didn't know what move his father would make first. He realized the only way to see the truth was to strike first. He lunged ahead, figuring that hitting first would make Patrick slip away to strike back. He thrust his sword at Patrick's side, but Patrick dodged and swung his own blade downward just as he had expected. In the background, Patrick was shocked, but he managed to stop the attack. He stepped back to praise Luru's moves and asked why he hadn't fought that way before. Luru just pointed out that he'd once said it's wise to keep a few winning tricks up your sleeve. Luru pressed ahead, slashing with his sword, while muttering that he'd been deep in thought. Patrick caught the next attack, relaxed his hold, and let the blade slip past him to escape the heavy hit. Luru spun his blade and swung it again. Patrick blocked the hit and realized the basics of Luru's moves were exactly what he had taught him. Patrick knew the move he'd taught Luru was about sealing off every escape and trapping the opponent until there was no way out. But Luru's style felt different, a relentless push forward. No matter how hard the opponent ran, Luru chased them down and crushed them, which wasn't completely illogical but didn't follow the usual rules either. It looked like Luru had fought in a real battle. Patrick joked about being a genius, but Luru shook his head in denial, only for Patrick to reply that his fighting style matched that of an experienced veteran, and Luru was truly amazed that Patrick could tell all that from just a few quick moves. Luru knew the truth, blending his years of fighting with a fierce style from a demon king into a modern sword dance that he had perfected. Patrick saw that mastering a true art like swordsmanship shouldn't be easy, so he stopped worrying about it since they were both getting too tired to fight more. Patrick lifted his sword, unleashed a burst of magic, and declared that their match would end with his next move. Luru smiled, seeing that Patrick's simple move captured the true spirit of orthodox swordsmanship. Yet it was far more polished than anything Rusty or even Luru could pull off right now. Luru lifted his sword, certain he had a clever trick ready. At the quote on the fin, Patrick sprinted ahead screaming that he was on his way, while Luru fired back with the same boldness, challenging Patrick to just take it. They both surged forward at the same time to deliver one sharp cut aimed right at each other. Hours later, he opened his eyes to find a room full of people drinking and wondered if he had stumbled into a tavern. Iris told him he was awake after his fight with Patrick, where he had lost and passed out. That memory brought him back to the moment Patrick struck him with a single blow, knocking him out. Still, he accepted the loss with ease and asked Iris what they were celebrating, even though he had just lost. He questioned whether this wasn't supposed to be a test that